to invite our panelists, Don Pitts, Donna Harrison, Dr. Michael Seaman, and Shannon Roach to come up on stage. I'm going to just start with a brief introduction about this panel as our panelists get seated. Are we missing one? Can you text her? Okay, thank you. So the next group that we're going to talk about is something that's come up a number of times in our conversations today and yesterday, and that's the role of quantitative and qualitative data and how it informs the music policy strategies that we're talking about. We're all reliant on this information, both to make arguments to our elected leaders, to really make informed decisions about the directions that we're going. So in this panel today, we're going to talk about how we use this information in terms of best practices. We're going to ask these individuals who are working in the field about the types of questions that they ask, how they maximize their return on those investments, the types of trends in research design that they're seeing in their work. I'm going to ask them to give us some examples of data and how it's been used to shape policy in real-world examples that they're working on, and then also talk about some of the pitfalls to avoid in commissioning or executing research strategies. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists today, and then I invite them to add additional information. Thank you all so much for traveling to be here today. We are honored to host you here in Boise, Idaho. Don Pitts is the founder, president of Sound Music Cities in Austin, Texas. Thank you for being with us today, Don. Donna Harrison is a director of cultural tourism and inclusive marketing in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I had the privilege of doing a public art tour with you earlier, and thank you for that opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. And then Dr. Michael Seaman is a director of arts management studies at Colorado State University. And then Shannon Roach Halberstadt will be joining us from the Washington State Department of Commerce. Okay, awesome, great. I'm going to join my colleagues. Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump right into it. Can you provide an example of how you're using qualitative and quantitative data to inform the policies that you're working on? Don, you want to kick us off?
Yes. It's quantitative and qualitative. So I think most recently, the Sacramento music census we did, we found an unusually high number of the venue and presenter ownership structure came in really high.
Was that a surprise?
Higher than normal. It was kind of in reverse. It was 38% DIY house concerts was the prevailing ownership structure. 26% was for-profit, compared to like in Austin, which was 62% for-profit. In our surveys, the census surveys that we use, we also use a mix, but I think the comments kind of bring to life the story behind the data. For instance, in Austin, there was comments, we were already on the cliff, COVID just pushed us off. And then another one in Austin, it brings true, there's this community called Bastrop, which is about 30 miles out of Austin. And one of the comments was, we can't even afford to live in Bastrop anymore. So this kind of gives us an idea of what we use.
Thank you. Do you have some examples from what you've been working on?
I do. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Donna L. Harrison, and thank you for the introduction. I am from Chattanooga, in case anyone wanted to know, Tennessee. I want to say that one of the things that stood out the most to me, I've been in this industry, meaning tourism is new, so I started in 2019. But prior to that, I've been in the music industry since I was 13 years old. I hope y'all think that was like 5 years ago, but it wasn't. And one thing that I noticed is one of the things, we actually worked together on the music census, and Don was a wealth of knowledge. I tell people that all the time. One of the things that stood out the most was 75% of our respondents, we realized that they were part-time in the industry. And it's like, we see that, I heard everybody talk about that today, and that was not surprising to me. But one of the other things that stood out the most, and Don and I were talking about this last night, is that most of the people that were entry level, there were more offerings for them when it comes to nonprofits. But the people that were in the industry for years, they had no help. They had no marketing. They needed assistance there. And those are a few things that stood out for us.
Can you talk a little bit more about this experience of how did you decide to bring Don in to do this? And then how did you work together? And what came out of that?
All right. Oh, great question. You know what I love about
know
this?
that too.
So I will say in 2017, there was a TXP report that had already happened for Chattanooga. And so when I got in my role, when it comes to Chattanooga Tourism Company, they needed to hire someone whose focus was culture, heritage, and arts. We are known for our beautiful outdoors, similar to Boise, but the arts was not elevated. And I heard a lot of complaints from creatives. They're like, we're not seen, we're not marketed, we're not heard. And 2019, 2020 shut down, and my background is community engagement and media. And so I was like, oh, our voices are gonna be heard. So I did a lot of Zoom meetings in my son's room, I'll never forget it, and it was all of the arts, the music partners, they pretty much said, I'm a little frustrated because the music industry is changing and we need to do another study. And we were like, why should we do another one? I'm like, the industry isn't the same, we must do another one. And so Don had several calls with our amazing music organizations, musicians, foundations, and the foundation actually reached out to 2 different organizations, and you all had like an RFP process, and we ended up working with Don, and I am so grateful because he has opened my eyes to a lot of different things, and then also the census has opened our eyes to more opportunity when it comes to our visitors and our local community when it comes to culture, heritage, and arts, especially music.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don, you want to talk about that experience?
Yeah, I think we were coming out of COVID. During COVID, I was working with the marvelous Michael Bracey and the other MPF folks on just what do we do during COVID when we thought that COVID was only going to be about 7 months. And then after that, I was looking at kind of different approaches of how do we do ecosystem assessments, like what was missing. During that time, I interviewed a bunch of grassroots leaders from cities that we'd worked in to kind of put together this thing. And then Chattanooga called, and I said, well, let's do a beta test and see how this process works. So it was kind of shifting more better community partners, designing it with the community instead of for the community was a big, big thing that we learned from interviews during the pandemic. So that's what we tried in Austin and Chattanooga. Was the second one that we had done with the new prototype.
Thank you. That gives us an example of how this work is really being used on the ground to make decisions and to make a difference in what you're doing. Welcome, Shannon. Michael, can you give us an example of some of the research that you've done?
Yeah. Is this? Yeah. Oh, great. Hey. Actually, we just are sunsetting a program that I worked on with Lisa Gagatis from the City of Denver Arts and Venues. And I was brought up to Colorado to work there. And we looked at the qualitative and quantitative data behind the music ecosystem of Denver. And they didn't really have an idea of what was going on, but they knew that it was rather robust. So we were able to quantify that and then offer a strategy. So we ended up writing a Denver music strategy and giving steps on what we thought would help. And it worked. The city took it very seriously, and they were given several, I believe it was $100,000 to begin with, and then there was matching funds from private industry. And all in all, over 5 years, we were able to give out $1.5 million to 176 different grantees. Most of them skewed in the youth realm and included the unhoused, people that were incarcerated, and it was a great success. And it all stems back to we had the data both in the field and also what we could pull online through things like Lightcast. And it made for a compelling policy change.
Thank you. I think that goes back to the earlier conversation about using the information to actually create an action plan and then to move on that, to create policy around that. Shannon, can you give us an example of the ways that you're using qualitative and quantitative data in your environment?
Sure. So I work more broadly statewide for the state of Washington and also more broadly for the creative economy as a whole, which includes music. And we just completed a study that took a year and a half because it was very comprehensive. We were looking at all the different industries within the creative economy, and we were looking at economic measures of that, the hard data. Basically, how does the creative economy show up in Washington state and where? What types of industries and what types of jobs? And then also to make that data come alive, we really needed to talk to the folks with feet on the ground who are practitioners, creative entrepreneurs, people who are working in the creative economy. So we drove all around the state of Washington, which is a big state, and we met with nearly 400 people.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yes, but it really to be able to understand the working environment and what are some of the opportunities for policy that data can then support, really having that qualitative data, the stories from people is essential. I would also say that there are two other things that were really essential in that study. One is that we had a work group of folks, 32 people from all around the state who were helping to guide this, and so they were able to make the connections within specific communities, and also within specific industries to build that trust, to be able to open up those conversations to get really good feedback from people in the industry. We learned that there are so many opportunities around space affordability, around really industry-specific business support, for creative entrepreneurs, for musicians, for actors, for writers. And we also learned that there's a huge need for infrastructure, kind of tying economic development models to the creative community that hasn't traditionally tapped into them. So with that, we actually have a strategic plan that we're launching within the next couple of weeks, and the legislature is actually receiving that strategic plan. They're ready to receive it. Within the strategic plan, there's 4 focus areas and then about 21 different policy recommendations within the strategic plan. And keep in mind that this is really broad. So it's not specific to the music industry, but musicians will definitely benefit from this, as well as most creative workers. Also, within gathering this data, like many people have said, we found so many holes. Many different creative workers are gig economy workers, so they just don't show up in the data. And music businesses are often coded differently than music businesses, so they don't show up in the data. A live music venue might be classified as a bar. And anybody who's a musician who shows up in national data is a full-time musician, and that's their job. So how do we capture those gig economy workers, and how do we really drill down into what's existing in the music industry so that we can also be industry specific? So like Kate mentioned earlier today, we're working also on drilling down into the music industry with a partnership between King County, State of Washington, and City of Seattle, and also leaning on our friends in the Cascadia Music Corridor who have already done this work with Music Oregon and Music Alaska too. And again, we have really deep connections in the music community and a lot of partnerships. A lot of people who are here today who run organizations like WANMA, like the Recording Academy. We have the Music Commission in Seattle, so there's a lot of those touch points of people who have already developed trust and have been working together for many years. So hopefully we'll have a really great result that's specific.
I can't wait to see it.
To the music industry, yeah.
Someone shared with me that she talked to elected officials about collecting this information, and their response to her was, we don't want you to collect this information because then you'll use it to lobby us for funding. And that's an interesting concept in terms of the fear of what this information can do. Can anyone talk to that point about the difficulty of getting funding for looking for this kind of information?
I can't speak for everyone, but oftentimes I've seen it's a multi or a collaborative effort. In my case, initially I was funded by the University of Colorado Denver, as well as partially the City of Denver Arts and Venues, because it was a shared interest for both. And I would highly recommend that if you're looking, because some of these studies can cost quite a bit, because it's an enormously time commitment. But you can sometimes have partnerships alongside, how should I say it, entities that are very much alongside each other.
So combining that political interest with that academic interest is what I'm hearing you saying.
Yeah, and your local university is oftentimes, there's people like me all over the country, not a lot of them, but Boise, you have Amanda Ashley, which is fantastic. And there's resources at a university that sometimes can be tapped.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Well, I would just say this is one reason why we kind of went to a new model to make it more affordable. We have community foundations that are funding this work. We have, I will say, a famous music city that we're going to launch in February has told me point blank we're going to use this. We know you don't like to weaponize the data, Don, but we're going to use it with the city because it's a music city that actually has not much music policy. It's in Tennessee. I'm just kidding. But it's really more, and I think that there's but making it more affordable and more accessible, so it is more community led is the thing. But then the universities, we have 2 universities that are partners in cities.
So what I hear you saying that it's by doing it with the community, it's something that really can be a benefit to the community, not something that is divisive, and then doing it with academic environments, you're able to benefit students as well, and to make it more affordable?
Yeah, and I think as you get further down into this session, there's a huge role in universities in this. I think it's where, I think most of the field is it's not associated or connected with the universities are starting to figure it out, so that universities can play a big role.
One of the first steps when we started doing the census with Don, he said you have to get the city involved. And so the first quote on our page, if you guys check out ChattanoogaMusicCensus.org, the quote is from the mayor. So that lets you know that we wanted to make sure that everyone was included, but we also had other funders that were at the table, which was us, which is a traditional convention and visitors bureau. We also had another partner that was our main funder for our arts organizations. We also had another funder that was, I think that was in one of our foundations that was a part of it. And so what made us work really well is that we had those grassroots organizations and we had those main funders collective. And so together, the person that I hired for the role to be the project manager, I kept having a conversation saying, hey, we need more partners. Because if you have more partners at the table from the beginning, then when the data comes out, people are going to want to use this data to apply for grants and other opportunities and initiatives. And we were able to use the data for several initiatives. It's been a year now where we rolled out the data. But going back, looking at it last night, just reviewing for this conversation, it was really important that he talked a little bit about the UTC students, so I'm going to share that really quickly. We have University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And so we have a partnership with those students. They go out in community. First of all, they study the data that they were presented, and the data that they were presented from the Chattanooga Music Census, it was a course for 1 semester. The second semester, which I love, this is my part, that was Don's part, that's Don's favorite part, but my favorite part is they have hands-on experiences. They go out to these live venues. They go to live music performances on our riverfront, and they're gonna get a grade specifically for their work that they're doing with us. And because we have 500,000 followers nationwide, they also get to work with the biggest platform when it comes to music. And what we have figured out, people, oh, this is huge, this is workforce development. But at the end of the day, a lot of those students that are taking this course, they are music lovers. So they're getting an opportunity to share what they love to do and also get that hands-on training because people are more, they're focusing on their digital platforms, as we move forward. So I thought that's just a cool opportunity.
That's a great example.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I think also, so there's two parts of that question. The first is, if you get this data, you may use it to lobby us. I would say yes, we might do that. But the thing is why should we be shy about that? Why should we be shy about educating our representatives about the needs of an industry? Every other industry does that. I work in the Office of Economic Development for the state of Washington, and I work alongside other sector leads. I lead the creative economy. I have folks who lead agriculture, maritime, aerospace, all of the industries you would guess would be key industries in Washington state. And I will tell you that they have the numbers. They know how to advocate for our their industries, and we need the same thing. As far as where to find the money, can't agree more. Partnerships with universities are great. For our music study, we're partnering with the University of Washington Evans School of Policy, and they're going to help us with the study. Also, just partnering with multiple different agencies. Like I said, government agencies can be really helpful. Offices of Economic Development sometimes will be able to throw some money at this and fund it. And then also, depending on where you are, maybe the government and universities just aren't a resource for you. And so looking at private philanthropy can be helpful as well.
Those are great suggestions.
Can I share one more
Please.
thing? I do want to share, I know Dawn was being modest earlier about working alongside. It's going to be Nashville. That's the next city. So Chattanooga was the first city in Tennessee, so the next one will be Nashville. But I want everyone in this room to also know it's so important to connect with the state, right? So with us connecting, we have a new Office of Entertainment. We have an entertainment commission at the state level. This is a newly formed group. We didn't realize that with our census that we were doing a pilot program for the entire state. And so now the state is going to give funding for every city in Tennessee to actually have a music census. And guess who is led by? This guy right here. Woo! Yay!
Get to go back to my home state.
So the cool thing about that is that, we're taking a deep dive for each city. But there's also a collaborative approach once we all get the data. How can we think about the Sister Cities program? How can we think about how to make sure that we have touring artists? How can we ensure that they're getting paid in every city that they go to? And we can have that music certified, a platform moving forward with every city in in Tennessee.
I think that brings it back to a more regional approach in terms of how we have to think about this, not just as our individual place, but as a larger region. I also want to note, I'm a PhD student at Boise State University, and one of the things I've observed is that the cities that are strong, oftentimes the states are strong in terms of having people like yourself at the state level doing this kind of work. That's going to make your partners at the city level stronger. So I think that your point is really important.
Well, I think to add that when I was at the city of Austin with the music office, I spent a lot of time helping San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and people would, some of the Austin music community would say, like, what do you care about them for? And from the data from the 2014 census that we did, we saw the importance of those regional gigs that our top level, mid-level talent was utilizing, because you can only play so many times in your hometown anyway. And so they were using those 3-hour drive markets as a main source of income.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes people think that data is really dry. Can someone talk a little bit about maybe the difference between qualitative and quantitative data and what makes it exciting and interesting?
Well, I've worked with both. And I always like to tell people, and my students especially, that you have to have the numbers, but you have to have the stories behind the numbers. And the numbers are fascinating because, I hate to say it, but the federal government knows a lot about you. And if you use things like Lightcast, which are data aggregators, you can start to see things like the gig economy. Where are these people? And they start to capture that a little bit because they're not just looking at one government agency's data, they're looking at several. And they have an army of people like us that sit in rooms and figure this out, how to aggregate it. So that alone's pretty fascinating, but the stories are what's great. Getting, like, in your case, getting out in the field, in your case as well. That's when you learn what is going on. The data may say one thing, but when you get out into the field, the stories may either substantiate that or actually kind of tell a different thing, a different way that things are happening that the quantitative data doesn't really capture.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful.
The qualitative data will hurt your feelings. That's the
Like,
bottom line.
give us an example.
One of the things, I feel like I've been in this music industry forever. I know about Chattanooga. I'm calling folks out. You can't tell us about our city. And you see the qualitative data, and one of the things that stood out was, Chattanooga is an elitist city when it comes to musicians and artists, performances. And I'm like, wait a minute, but you can't hide that. Those are the things that we said people are fearful of when it comes to lobbying, because a lot of that is truth. And so for us to go back and review, Don kept saying, review the comments. Those were the things that stood out the most, but those were the things where we could actually make some cool decisions and different initiatives when it comes to the work that we all needed to do.
Yeah, a lot of times we assume that we know the place that we're in, but when we ask people who are actually in that city, we get different answers.
Well, and I will say we have to remember the participants of the ecosystem, it means different things to different people. For instance, there's usually about 30% of the creators that are doing it full time. And then there's another 30% or so, it shifts, that are working a full-time job. And then there's the other 35, 40% that are working 4 jobs, but so they can focus on their music. So there's different economic strategies that the participants are deploying. So it's important to know that. That's why I think the comments are so telling. They're a treasure trove of insight.
Are there best practices that you can share about collecting this information with our audiences so they can take that back to their communities?
Okay.
This is the one that Dawn and I have been talking about a lot. Have you ever heard the analogy, somebody can create a flyer, but what does it mean if nobody walks past it? We did all this work, brought all these partners together. We told them the reason why we were doing it. But I think because it's been a year now, it's time for us to go back and take a deep dive in what we've learned from that data. I think what happens is people are so excited about doing it because there's a way. If you ask every music organization and every artist, there's one answer that remains across the world: we need funding. Is that not true? Can we get funding? Even the people that aren't the best artists, we need funding. We're like, for what? That's how we feel sometimes. But when you circle back around, if we could do anything differently, starting now, I think we should advocate a lot more for those artists from the beginning and go back again. And I think there's a plan in place for us to go back and teach what we've learned along the way, because a lot of people don't even know it's there. A lot of musicians don't know how to apply for certain grants because they don't know that they have the backing, and it's up to us to teach the information that we have.
Well, as far as concrete examples, and I'll, Austin learned that there was a big migration from the data. There was a migration to the 5-county region. They changed the grant eligibility to the 5-county region, but most of the work had to be done in Austin. And then we still haven't recovered from the pandemic. There's about 35 to 40% of the respondents in these cities are saying that they're about 30% are saying they're way below what they were in pre-pandemic levels.
We found the same thing in Washington State. The pandemic had an outsized impact on, creative workers, on creative businesses. I also think it's really interesting, you know, you were talking about how data can be dry and how do you make it come alive. I can't agree more with my friends that the stories are what really make it come alive. And it's wonderful if you can tell a story about that illustrates like what the data point is, you know. Tell us, in our strategic plan, we collected them as case studies, talking about different organizations and the good work that they do, filling some of the needs that you know, the creative community has. And if you couple that then with data, it's going to stick in people's head a little bit more. If you just give them numbers, that's not going to stick in their head. So, you know, I think that that can be really helpful. Also, I have some partners in Washington State in an organization called WhipSmart, and they provide support for creative workers and entrepreneurs. And they have a page on their website that's all data, and across the top it says, the data shall set you free. And it can, because it actually can give you the fuel that you need to apply for funding, you know, to further your industry, to tap into kind of some of the resources that usually, you know, arts or music wouldn't be able to tap into if you can really show like the impact of the workers in the industry.
So one thing I'm hearing from you is that we need to create a baseline of information, and then we have to keep going back to see where that information is so that we know, are we recovered from the pandemic, or what conditions have changed in these different situations. And then I also heard from other groups that we need to ask questions of the people who are at our events, that when we ask questions at those events and get that information, that's real-time information. So maybe it's not a huge survey, maybe it's a small event that they're able to get information from a particular concert series, for example. When you go into a city to do a study, what are the kind of questions that you ask? What kind of information do you want to know?
Well, I just finished 2 studies, one in Northwest Arkansas and one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, about music venues and their value beyond just being places to see music. Because we all know that music venues are culturally important and socially important, as well as economically important. So going in there, and this was kind of through my work with NEVA on the economic impact calculator for venues, I just wanted to find out, and honestly, this is one of the easiest ones. I had maybe 5 questions, but for me, the most important thing was that I was connected with a broad range of people. And that's one thing I have to stress about this. If you are going to have this kind of research, try to find someone like myself who's a musician and also does this. I think we all are in some ways involved in music or have been, because things can be missing. I was surprised that in one region I went to, the regional Mexican scene was not even addressed, and it was bizarre because it was a huge scene there. And it wasn't addressed by it just happened that there was a consultant firm that went in before me to do another study. And when I asked about this, they're like, you know, the other consultant firm never asked about this. And I was like, it's huge. So with that, just, you know, the questions of, you know, just basically being a musician and hanging out. That's one of my strong suits. I just happen to have a PhD. PhD in indie rock. Yeah, and just call it snowball sampling, where you're talking to somebody and be like, man, who else should I know? And that is also very powerful. I found an excellent contact for the harsh noise indie scene underground in Tulsa, just because it turns out his mom was someone I was interviewing who did a lot of PR for NPR and other places, Kane's Ballroom, things like that. So that definitely suggests, I don't think I answered your question, but sometimes fewer questions are better.
What do you ask?
Well, in the recent study that we did, we had a list of questions that we'd ask everyone that we talked to. And that was really helpful because you didn't necessarily have to be in a listening session or a meeting. You could actually just have a conversation with somebody. And there were questions like, what's your role in the creative economy? You know, are you able to hire workers that you need to hire if they're a business person? You know, asked them about the impacts of the pandemic for them and what they would need to recover. Asked them about, like, do you get business support, or as an individual artist, do you get professional development development support, you know. So with having this list of questions, it made it so that everybody who was involved in the study was able to gather that information and do it in a way that's culturally appropriate. You know, because you can't really sit in a live music venue while there's a show going on with a table taking notes. So, yeah.
But you're giving them a bigger voice. You're
Right.
bringing their voices to our elected officials and to other people
Exactly.
who might be able to invest resources.
Exactly. And to your point, too, it's really important to have people who understand the industry in there, because they'll be able to gather information from a place of trust and relationship. And also just build, you know, we're all inherently curious about music. So when we hear about like this pocket of ranchero music, like in Central Washington, we're like, oh, cool, I want to go see that. You know, like we want to meet those musicians. We want to meet the folks who are recording them. And it's fun to expand our communities as well.
But it also brings up this question of equity. How do we make sure that Black and brown people and the interests that they have are also in that information set? How do you address that in the research that you do?
Well, like I said, we really go for the lived experience, and we added equity. Post-pandemic, we added an equity piece. We're getting a lot of insight from that. A lot of the cities weren't, and I think Chattanooga was very hesitant at first. There were some community partners that were like, we don't want to ask that. I was like, well, we're going to ask it. And we just found a lot of insight. But I know we just did a deeper dive on the equity piece in Austin that we're going to release in January in coordination with the Long Center for Performing Arts. But we found a vast difference between, you know, I think we want to just put the BIPOC community all in one big bucket. And so we analyzed the BIPOC community, and there are, you know, a lot of similarities and crossovers, and then there's huge differences between the three. And then the three main.
Can you give us an example of those differences?
It's just more about, you know, obviously it's the pathway to long sustainable career is more challenging for the African American community than it is for the Mexican American community, and even the Asian community in Austin has different. It's a geography. They all live in different places, different parts of Central Texas. That's the main one. That was the takeaway was various economic strategies was more difficult for different groups to deploy. And then, you know, getting back to the other question, I think for what we're learning, there are a growing number of artists that don't care about making money off music, which by their comments, they let us have it about, you know, what do you mean about, you know, if I commercialize my art, it's one of the 7 deadly sins. So I think understanding, you know, the ones that won't help, the ones that just want to make their art and don't really want grants or professional development, and that's fine. I think the thing that we're learning is that everyone belongs in or how to help them belong in the ecosystem.
Or how to help provide what people want, and those are different things for different communities or different individuals.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to just tail on that. It is true, you know, it's an enormous amount, as we all know, musicians, it's not their full-time job. They do other things. And I've been in a band for 22 years, and I've seen musicians that are doctors, lawyers, real estate agents, nonprofit administrators, teachers, graphic designers. Ask that question, what else do you do? Because when you have that information, you can go back to the policymakers and say, hey, look, your music scene is an amazing amenity for the knowledge and talent that's going to drive your growth forward. Think about helping them.
I got that from him 5 years ago.
I think it's just hard to see it sometimes, to really understand what it is, to your point.
Yeah.
If we could circle back to talk a little bit about engaging like super diverse people and businesses in gathering data. When we were putting together that work group I referred to with over 30 people from around the state, we were really intentional about bringing in people from different races, different gender identities, cultural backgrounds, places in the state, different roles within the creative economy and such, so that we had those people from the get-go helping to form the way that we were doing the data collection and shaping strategy. We also put aside some money to be able to provide stipends for people who volunteered their time to spend a longer time with us in a listening session. We did listening sessions that were culturally specific for Latinx people, for folks, Native folks, Black folks. And so we made sure that we were working with the people who are from the community to connect with community and really lead that data gathering. It's really important. And then where appropriate, also making sure that you're compensating people for their time.
One of the reasons why I didn't respond initially because people expect me to respond. So I'm gonna be honest, I wanted to see what the responses were before, so that's why I didn't say anything. But I do wanna share one thing. I have always been in music. The truth is, African Americans, we have always been in music. If you have a cultural conversation, we are at the table. But when it's time for policies to be made, when there's time for a music census to happen, we're not at the table. And one of the things that I pride myself in this year, I have been in this music industry, and I keep telling people since I was 13 years old, and I was not at the table, but last year I led the table. And thank you. I don't know if we clap for that or feel sad for that. But, with that being said, the thing that we did differently in Chattanooga that I was what were the respondents?
The Chattanooga broke our record. It was 3.3 responses per 100,000 general population.
Wow.
Bam. And let me say why I'm so proud of that, and I'm not surprised when we were asked to lead this. One thing I know is old school traditional radio. And the way old school traditional radio works, if you make the people the stars in turn, you will be respected. And how you're respected is you start bringing people at the table with or without a stipend at the beginning and have those conversations. What we did was we actually hired 2 people that were boots on the ground that sent text. That's the new way to be boots on the ground. They sent text out to their friends. We went to a local radio station. I'm still on a local radio station because I know African Americans, a lot of us are still listening to traditional radio. People over 40 are listening to traditional radio. So we went back to that model. The people that are playing consistently every single weekend in Tennessee, they are at churches. We had somebody that was on our team who was a project manager who was into faith. She was a singer, had her own business, and in the faith-based music industry, who are often left behind. We know that one of the things that Chattanooga is known for, in case you don't know, Usher Raymond is from Chattanooga, and I am proud. Samuel L. Jackson is from Chattanooga, but I don't want to say some of the cuss words that he would say up on his platform. But with that being said, Bessie Smith, we're known for our African American music, and most of our artists are jamming out in studios, and a lot of their things are being played on the radio, but when it's time for the music ecosystem conversation, they are not budging because nobody's bringing them in. And so whether it's Latinx, whether it is African American or any person of color, we don't want to say, hey, it's time to include folks to have a roundtable discussion every blue moon. You bring them in when it's time to make decisions and policies and things like that, because at the end of the day, like someone said earlier, some of those sound ordinance things are usually for hip hop, R&B. Country music and heavy metal is blasting all over town, and we're not set back because of that. I usually hate to be the one that's always talking DEI, but at the end of the day, if I'm in Boise, I was told to use my voice wherever my feet may trot. And I just want to say thank you. But I just want to share that we need to start including people from the beginning and stop waiting. Your DJs on their personalities in your communities, start talking to them. They know how to connect with people. Don't disregard them because there's several different streams of this on the on YouTube and this here. At the end of the day, people want one source, and everybody in here has their one main source that they connect with. And we have to continue to think of everybody that's not at the table as humans. And please, let's be clear. I got one more thing to say. Every black person does not think the same. Every white person does not think the same. Every man is not the same, nor woman. So when you are pursuing and asking EDI and DEI questions to us, make sure that you are open and do not assume how I feel. Know and think and respect how I am.
Thank you.
Amen.
No, that was fantastic. I think that you said what we all need to hear. We all need to be responsible for DEI in the work that we do, both in the process that we're conducting and then in what we do with those results. And I think that's something that we, especially in the Cascadia music corridor, we need to remember that at every step of the game. So we just have a few minutes left. I just want to offer each of you an opportunity to have some closing comments on this topic. Shannon, would you like to start?
Sure. I think I'd like to go back to your question about the data being dry, because I think that that's part of it that is really important to think about, especially in the creative community, and especially around music. A lot of times people shy away from that sort of thing, and it can just be so beneficial for us being able to come up with policies and come up with programs that are going to protect and further music, especially at a time where it's increasingly difficult to make money as a musician or a music business. So yeah, get that data and use it.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say universities are becoming more publicly engaged. It's a trend. CSU is like that. I'm very proud to be there. Boise State is like that. Amanda's here. Wherever you are in the Cascadia region, look to your university as a resource. There's a good chance they'll be able to help you.
Thank you.
Really quickly, the way people listen to music and experience it has changed. We've had declines in festivals, we've had declines with venues, but if there's a decline, then we need to get together and figure out the new model. The model has changed, and we don't know what it looks like, but I think we need to be open that things are not the same as they were 50 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 4 years ago, and just be open to the direction in which we're going, because music is going to make us happy no matter where we are. And it's our form, it's our expression, it's our being. But most importantly, even though I said there's some setbacks, we have to remember when it comes to the arts, there's so many opportunities, and we have to stay hopeful in the spaces that we're in.
Thank you.
Closing, I would say that what we've been grappling with the last month or so is really how much time we spend digesting the data. It's usually, we spend 6 months collecting it, analyzing it, and doing a report, and then our society kind of really just wants the data in a drive-through, 5 minute, 5 takeaways, and then we forget. And I think to Donna's point earlier about going back and revisit, I know when I go back and revisit reports that we did even last year, I see something different. And so we're modeling kind of spending some more time with the data, with the community, having the community spend more time with it, at least maybe equal the time that we use to collect it.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the Music Policy Forum for having us have this conversation, and I look forward to sharing information with all of you and all of you. Thank you.